The house kept time with its own quiet breathing. Small, indifferent sounds that used to be background to a life lived in two voices. Tonight those noises felt accusatory. The refrigerator hummed like a steady, watchful animal. The wall clock ticked as if it were counting down. The ceiling fan creaked on its slow arc, and each faint groan in the plaster sounded to Ryan like a confession. He sat at the edge of the couch with a half-full glass of whiskey balanced in his hand. It was the same bottle they'd shared on late nights when bills were tight and hopes were large, when Megan had warmed his palms and they had mapped the life they were building together with laughter and small sacred rituals. The label had faded from handling. The liquor was familiar but not comforting. He swallowed more to feel something other than the cold hollow that had opened in his chest. The living room looked unchanged. The framed wedding photo on the mantel, the chipped coffee table with all the little dents from tools and dropped mugs, the throw pillows in their carefully mismatched patterns. Everything sat where it belonged. Everything was suddenly performative. Ryan stared at the photo of them on a cliffside, squinting into sun and each other. She had her arm around him, he around her. They'd seemed like a single promise bound by smiles. The image burned like a lamp left on too long. Pretty, bright, and slowly smoldering. He wasn't a man given to dramatics. Gregarious by nature, he could talk to a stranger about engines, torque curves, or the best way to get that stubborn bolt out of a rusted hinge. He could fix a radiator with an oily hand and a stubborn grin. But relationships weren't as easily repaired as cars. When a marriage rattled, there were no replacement parts you could bolt on and expect everything to run like new. For months, Megan had seemed less present. At first it was small things. A late-night call that lasted until the small hours. A distant smile across the dinner table. The way she'd stand in the kitchen and thumb through her phone with a practiced look of exhaustion that felt almost theatrical. He told himself 100 rational things. Work, burnout, stress. It was easier, safer, to spin stories where love was strained but intact. The alternative required a violence he wasn't ready to admit. Suspicion. This morning's breakfast had been the first real fissure. Megan had used the word family like a shield. "Dad's not doing great," she'd said, light and practiced. "I might stay with him for a few days." Ryan had asked if he should come. He'd offered to reschedule customers, to close up early, to drive with her and relieve any burden. She had hesitated for a breath too long. "No," she'd said. "He's more comfortable when it's just family." The emphasis had been almost imperceptible. To anyone else it would have passed for ordinary. To him, it landed like a stone. And then there had been that kiss, a peck on the cheek, soft but not warm, as if it had been given out of obligation. He'd worked the words down with the same care he used when tightening a bolt, but they tasted empty on his tongue. "Call me when you get there," he'd said, and the way she said, "All right," later that day had been brisk, clipping the end of the invitation like she was excising him from the clause. 3 days. That was the schedule she'd set for herself. 3 days of clipped calls, 3 days of mechanical updates about Dad resting and they're managing. Each time his phone vibrated, Ryan's stomach would lurch with anticipation that quickly curdled into something worse. The sense that his life was being run as a rehearsal, where he had not been told his cues. He told himself not to look. He worked the shop during daylight, cars lined like patient patients needing care. He fixed fenders, tuned engines, swapped transmissions. He could lose himself in the satisfying logic of a job that had clear problems and clear solutions. People trusted him. Metal and rubber didn't lie. But at night, after the last customer left and the fluorescent lights blinked into the quiet that preceded closing, suspicion woke and took its seat with him in the house. Connor noticed first. He had the kind of face that wore its worries plainly, a soft mouth that favored truth even when it bit. "You look like hell, man," Connor said the first night over a grease-stained workbench, leaning against the toolbox as if against a confession. Ryan shrugged, wiped his hands on a rag. "She's at her dad's. He's sick." Emma's brows drew together. "Isn't he in Florida? Didn't she post something about being with him last month? Ryan felt the wrench slip from his hand, literally, not metaphorically, the familiar weight clanging to the cement floor with an ugly metallic echo. The sound was a punctuation mark. For a while he simply stared at the spill of tools as though they might rearrange themselves into a better truth. The doubt settled like dust. It didn't scream. It sneaked in under the door. It threaded through his days like a slow leak. He began to notice things he hadn't let himself notice before. The faint scent of a perfume he didn't own that lingered on the sleeve of an article of clothing. An unfamiliar receipt in the coat pocket from a restaurant he'd never heard of. A blouse in the laundry that hadn't been his or hers. Each discovery was a small, precise cut that opened the same wound wider. He should have talked to her. He should have demanded truth, grabbed her phone, sat her down, made her look him in the eyes. For some reason he didn't. Maybe because the man who'd once felt complete with the warmth of her whole hand in his had dwindled into something that feared confrontation. Maybe because he'd been taught, by his father, by his friends, by late-night television, that men shouldn't make scenes, shouldn't beg. Or maybe, most simply, he wasn't ready to see the bandaged face of whatever had become of his marriage. Instead, he watched. He collected pieces. Paranoia turned into method. Whereas before he would have recoiled from snooping, now he found a pragmatic satisfaction in inquiries. He logged into their shared credit card account, at first out of petty curiosity, then with the single-mindedness of a man who had remembered how to look. He kept the shop's lights on an extra hour. He called old friends of Megan's who knew the city she claimed to be in. He listened to the way her voice sounded in the messages she left. The practiced concern, the controlled cadence, the pauses that spoke more than words. There was no dramatic storm of discovery, no magnifying glass that revealed betrayal like an insect pinned under glass. Instead, there was the ledger, a charge that winked like a beacon amidst rows of legitimate domestic items. Willow Palms Resort, 2 guests, Bungalow 23. The entry was clinical, dispassionate, a timestamp, a number, a dollar amount. It looked like any other line on the bank statement, and yet it felt like an indictment. Ryan didn't rage. He didn't call. He didn't respond with the heat of the moment. Rage was, he thought, a concession to being undone. Betrayal, he decided in the hush of that dawn where he sat with a whiskey glass pressed to the side of his teeth, deserved precision. The idea settled like cold iron in his hands. If you were going to dismantle something, do it with care. If you wanted to burn a bridge, be sure it was the right one and that the fire would take everything you wanted it to. He remembered a time when the worst thing that could happen was a broken starter or a snapped belt. Fixing something tangible meant a predictable outcome. New part, tighten screw, engine hums again. Fixing a heart? Not so simple. But there were parallels. Diagnosis first, then plan. Tools second, timing third. Ryan set the glass down, the amber liquid clinking faintly. There would be no yelling from the kitchen table, no frantic scene. He was not a man who found catharsis in spectacle. He wanted, instead, a clean end. He wanted the evidence to be unequivocal. No ambiguity, no room for revision. Memory came back in fragments. The way Megan's laugh had changed. The way she had started to tidy their life with neat, careful gestures as if preparing it for someone else. The way she had begun to call him babe with less and less warmth. The nights she had claimed work dinners and came home smelling faintly of unfamiliar cologne. The way she had trimmed their shared calendar and returned with entries labeled in her neat, efficient hand. He thought of the small things that had once been markers of intimacy that now felt like props. The dish towel she draped the same way on the oven handle. The coffee mug she reused for hours. On the counter, the way she'd fold his shirts if he left them in a heap. It was not merely the physical evidence that stung. It was the realization of how comfortable he had become in his own ignorance. He had been a man who preferred harmony to conflict, whose instinct was to smooth the rough edges rather than scrape them clean. In love, he'd been willing to accept small evasions because they were cheaper than the price of truth. Now the cheapness had revealed its cost. Threatened. That night, instead of making a scene, he made a list. He wrote things down the way he once cataloged parts for an order. Date, detail, evidence. There was a ruthlessness in turning messy human pain into an inventory. It gave him the illusion of control. He listed the dates Megan had left, the calls she'd made, the posts that didn't line up, the names he didn't recognize. He printed a page from the credit card site and circled Willow Palms in a shaky black pen. The circling felt final, like the seal on an envelope. Imprisonment. He thought of leaving town, of packing a bag and walking away. The idea flickered and died. Some men left when they could not bear, but leaving would be ceding his story to her hands. The thought that she might walk away with the sense that she'd taken everything and left him nothing was worse than confronting the truth. He wanted ownership of the ending. He wanted to be the agent, not the passive recipient of fate. Ryan had always been practical in love and work. There was a tenderness in how he handled both, slight, guarded, but real. He loved in small, tangible gestures, making coffee just the way she liked it, leaving notes on the bathroom mirror when he had to travel, picking up her dry cleaning without being asked. The insidious thing about the betrayal was that it transformed those gestures into evidence of a life now false, props in a stage set he had not known he was standing on. He planned because planning was better than panic. He planned because his hands, used to pulling apart engines and putting them back together, needed motion. He planned because precision hurt less than the jagged randomness of an emotional explosion. He planned because he imagined later nights where the story would be told in absolute terms. The man who had been wrong took careful measures and changed the course of his life. Shameful. It was not that he wanted revenge for revenge's sake. He wanted reparation in the form of truth, accountability. He wanted to watch the scaffolding of their lies fall down and count the cost. He wanted to leave no corner untouched, no account unbalanced. People often believed revenge was noise, a clamor of emotion and broken china. Ryan favored silence, a quiet eradication. Make the evidence speak. Let it make the noise she claimed to fear. He wanted to make sure the ending was not only seen, but understood. The plan, at first, was small and deliberate. He'd verify. He'd go to Willow Palms under the guise of an innocuous inquiry. He would track the bungalow number, find out names, schedules, patterns. He would not be a screaming man with a sign. He would be a silent presence who recorded truth. There would be photographs, timestamps, receipts. He'd take down details like a mechanic marking torque settings. Exact, repeatable, undeniable. He'd build a case not for a courtroom, but for a life that could no longer be faked. Unresolved. There was also a part of him he did not name, some raw, animal thing that wanted to hurt. It was a small flame he kept banked. He was not a cruel man, but betrayal ignited instincts that had nothing to do with principle. He wanted the other man to know the depth of the wound he'd opened. He wanted Megan to measure, finally, the gravity of what she'd exchanged their life for. He wanted her to look into the hollow he'd been and know she'd hollowed it out. Impeachment. He poured another drink and let the house hold its breath with him. Through the thin curtain of memory and plan, he saw the shape of the man he could become. Methodical, exact, careful in his dismantling. The thought steadied him. It felt right to control the narrative. It felt right to transform grief into something with an edge and a purpose. He would be the curator of his own end. Ignition. The whiskey warmed the inside of his chest. The light outside the window was the kind of blue that belonged to a city that forgot people in the night. He reached for his phone and wrote a series of emails he would not send yet. To the resort, to a friend who owed favors, to a private investigator if necessary. He bookmarked the page with the credit card charge and opened other tabs, gathering like a man assembling tools before a long job. Immigration, Obierno. Covered dawn, when the house was only the skeleton of memory, and the light was a thin wash. He walked through the rooms they had shared and paused at things he had never once truly considered. He stood by Megan's side of the closet and let his fingers brush the clothes she'd left behind. There were dresses he recognized, and a scarf that still held her scent. He clutched it and felt something he did not want to name. A grief that was not quite fury, not quite surrender. He breathed in the perfume again and found it was the same faint floral trace he'd noticed before. It no longer read as a memory, but as a clue. Isolation. When he left the house that morning, his motions were as precise as any he'd perform in the shop. He locked the door with his key, checked the back window, and set his phone to silent. He drove to the shop, turned the sign from open to closed, and sat at the workbench not to repair a car, but to plan the next domestic operation of his life. Tools lay around him, idiotic in their normalcy. Sockets, wrenches, rags, a manual left open to an unfamiliar page. He listened to the radio, let the news wash over him, but the words made little difference. His mind was engaged on a narrower frequency. PEM didn't expect absolution. He didn't expect a reconciliation. What he expected and wanted was clarity. He wanted justice in the form of an undeniable truth. He wanted to be able to say later, to himself, to anyone who asked, that he hadn't been blind. He wanted the story to end with no room for revision, a ledger closed with a final, irrefutable balance. And so he began, quietly, methodically. The revenge he was contemplating was not the clumsy violence of movies, but the cold thing of careful work. He drew lines, set timers, and sterilized his intent. In the silent house with the clock ticking, he held the first clear notion of what he would do. He would undo the lie with tools and documents and facts. He would tear down the theater of their marriage with the economy of a man used to laying down a new engine in an afternoon. Terminated. Outside, the first light came like a promise. Inside, Ryan sat very still, listening to the silence that now spoke louder than words ever could. The morning after he'd circled Willow Palms on a printed statement, Ryan woke with a knot that felt like a rented engine in his chest. Heavy, unfamiliar, but steady enough to run on. He moved through the house like a man passing through someone else's property, cautious, cataloging, measuring. Megan's side of the bed was cool. The imprint of her body had already smoothed into memory. Sunlight threaded through the blinds in neat, lazy lines. He brewed coffee the way he always did, 2 scoops, strong, milk on the side, and set a cup on the table as though any ritual could anchor him. Shimmer. On the kitchen island, he left the paper with the circled charge face down, as if the mere exposure would make the evidence evaporate. He told himself he'd be rational. He told himself he'd ask, and if it turned out to be nothing, he'd be the apologetic husband who'd let his imagination run wild. But there was a weight now beneath his words, a gravity that pulled the truth into focus. You don't unring a bell, he thought. You don't unread what you have already seen. At the shop, the afternoon smelled like oil and old rubber. Customers came and went with the habitual familiarity of townspeople who trusted you with machines, not with secrets. Ryan took apart a brake caliper and felt, absurdly, that the rhythmic motion steadied him. He replaced the pads, torqued the bolts, tightened the nuts. The metal obeyed. It had no loyalties. It only did what physics demanded. There was a comfort in that. Ignition. Corrections. Connor arrived just after 3, carrying an energy that read as worried optimism. He'd been the first to notice Ryan's change, the first to ask if he was sleeping, eating, seeing anyone. Connor was the kind of friend who slid into the role you needed him to be. Comic relief, shoulder, enforcer. Today he wore the look of a man trying not to ask the question he already knew the answer to. "You call her?" Connor asked, leaning on the hood of a sedan, arms crossed, face shadowed. Ryan shook his head. "No, not yet." "You should." Connor's voice was a low insistence, like someone nudging a sleeper. "Say something. Ask. Don't sit and stew." Contested. Ryan rubbed his palms on a rag. "And say what? Hey, sweetheart, is the Willow Palms charge for you and a stranger? Can I stop by and help with the family thing?" He forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not that simple." Connor rolled his shoulders. "No, but you can't let it fester. If it's nothing, it's nothing. If it's not, you at least get an answer." "Connor, what? I don't want an answer?" Ryan's voice had a sharper edge than intended. He looked at Connor, and for a moment his friend's face confused pity with impatience. I want 1,000 answers. I don't want him in my head explaining it. I want to find out for myself, in my own way. Connor regarded him, then nodded slowly. All right, your way. Just don't settle for suspicion being your life. Suspicion had already taken residence in Ryan's life. It had rearranged the furniture. The trust they'd shared belonged strictly on Megan's side now. The things he once accepted without question had to be verified. Every message she'd left the 3 days prior he replayed in his head. Each "dad resting" and "we'll see" had become a soundbite in an evidence reel he could not shut off. The easy explanations that had been his refuge, work stress, an emergency, a lie of omission, felt too thin. There was texture to this falsehood, a carefulness to it, like a seamstress hiding stitches in a hem. Mailbox. That evening he decided to do what he had avoided, talk to her directly. He told himself he would be measured, calm, a man seeking clarity. He would not be the cliché of a husband trawling through private details or staging a confrontation. He'd ask, once, and accept the truth. Sex Egan answered after 2 rings. Her voice was bright, the practiced brightness she used for colleagues and clients when she wanted to seem unassailable. Hey, how are you? Strengthening. He fine. He kept his tone flat. How's your dad? Termina pause. Ryan listened to the background sound of a television, muffled laughter, the clink of glass. He's sleeping, a bit restless, but okay. The meds kicked in. She said it as if reciting a briefing. How's the shop? Slamming. He thought of the wrench that had slid from his hand. The image still flared. Listen, did you book somewhere recently? I saw mall sanctions. What? There was a flash of something in her voice, soft like an underskirt. What saw? Iliation. He could have let it go. He could have swallowed the question and filed it away as another tooth in the jaw of doubt. Instead, he let the evidence speak. There's a charge on the card. Willow Palms, Bungalow 23. I thought you said your dad was in Florida. It was subtle, like a plate just beginning to chip. Ryan, She interrupted, and the sentence that followed was practiced, like a lawyer drawing a carefully worded plea. I told you. He wasn't in Florida when I said that. He's been back a little earlier than expected. I didn't mean to lie, I just didn't want you to worry. It's complicated. Complicated. The words were a scalpel. Another pause. There's no one else, Ryan. It was a trust thing. It's not what you think. Her voice was the softest it had been since they'd married, the kind of voice she used to soothe children or fragile clients. Please don't jump to conclusions. He had wanted to be calm. Instead, anger rose like heat. Trust thing? At a resort? Bungalow 23? 2 guests? How is any of that good? She inhaled sharply. It's not. I didn't want to drag you into this. It wasn't about you. It was he's been unwell for months, and some things happened, and I needed to sort them out myself. I didn't want you involved. I'm your husband, he said. The words felt smaller than they should have been. You call me family and then tell me to stay out of family? I said he'd be more comfortable with family, she corrected automatically, as if restating the lie made it true. I didn't say not you. Ryan, please. He listened for a second, trying to hear the Megan he'd loved in the cadence of her voice. He found instead a palimpsest, the scripted tones of someone who'd practiced how to say the necessary things without saying too much. Who was the other guest? He asked finally. There was a longer silence than before. Through the jitter of pixels and sound waves, he imagined her eyes flicking away, the small movements people made when making up stories in the margins of their mouths. No one you know, she said. A friend of a friend. It wasn't about being romantic. We talked, I needed advice. On Dad. On the estate. We had to make some decisions. It was a slender lie stretched thinly over a truth he could not see. At a resort? We needed privacy, she said. It's hard to talk about money, Ryan. It's ugly. You could have told me, he said. You could have said, I need privacy, and I would have respected it. I know, she whispered. I'm sorry. He wanted to believe her. Her apology was a balm. It soothed the raw edges, if only for a breath. He imagined every possible scenario where she was telling the truth. A friend helping, a quiet weekend to figure legal things out, a confidential meeting with someone who knew how estates were handled. Yet the image of Willow Palms, sunsets, secluded bungalows, the easy intimacy resorts fostered, kept intruding. It didn't line up with the stories he was offering. If it's just paperwork, why two guests? He asked, softer. You always want to complicate things, she snapped, then quickly softened. There was a lawyer with us, a colleague. The billing would list two guests because the lawyer was registered for a conference. It looks worse than it is, Ryan. Kennedy. He wanted to press, to pry the seam open. Instead, he let her impression stand and let the phone cooling between them maintain a fragile bridge. If that's true, send me whatever documentation, he said. Receipts, emails. I'm not trying to ambush you. I just need to know what's true. I will, she promised. I'll send everything when I get back. Ryan, don't do anything rash. Mismatch. Nothing rash, he lied. I just want the truth. Ramifications. They hung up with the kind of fragile civility he'd once taken for granted. Afterwards, he felt the old, familiar coil of anger. He wanted to smash something. He wanted to make her feel the jaggedness of his disbelief. But he also recognized the way she'd chosen her words, rehearsed, precise, defensive. The lie, if it was a lie, had craft. It had been tailored to give plausible deniability. That night he traced the contours of the words she'd said. He replayed her insistence that it wasn't about him and felt a queasy shift. It had previously been incredulous to think someone she loved could be excluded from a family-level decision. But the deeper cut was not selfishness, it was secrecy. Megan had carved out private spaces within the life they shared, and in doing so she'd shifted the axis of their relationship. He, silenced, he began collecting confirmation in the only way he felt capable of, with patience and small, quiet intrusions. He called the resort under the pretense that he was a writer, doing a story on weekend getaways for small businesses. He couldn't believe the ease of the front desk clerk's answers. Bungalow availability, the names on registration, names he did not recognize. He made a cursory note of check-in times, of the way the resort insisted on discretion for certain guests. The woman on the phone was helpful in the way people are when paid to be. There were no hints of scandal in her voice. There was only the clinical currency of hospitality. Back at home, he sat down at the kitchen table and made a plan. If Megan was telling the truth, he would produce the evidence and apologize. If she was lying, he would gather facts until the lie could not be sustained. He made contingencies, an inbox wipe strategy for his own mind, how to preserve data, how to collect receipts, how to photograph things that might subsequently be hidden. He considered hiring someone, a private investigator. The idea tasted like an admission of defeat and yet was practical, like any new tool. A message arrived, a shot of sunlight, a selfie Megan had taken on what she said was a porch somewhere tropical. Her smile in the photo looked practiced, the same smile she used for professional headshots. Dad stable, the caption read, feeling better, home tomorrow, miss you. Beneath the image was a short string of emojis, a heart, a palm tree, a coffee cup. Ryan held the phone and felt the picture as evidence and as a provocation. The heart emoji felt like mockery. He called the number she'd given for the lawyer, left a voicemail that was deliberately neutral. He scanned her email for attachments she'd promised. None came. The paper trail grew thin at the places he most wanted it to thicken. He told himself the patient approach was best. He waited 3 days. 2 weeks could be a lifetime if something was being hidden, but Ryan was nothing if not careful. He kept the circled credit card charge in a folder labeled Evidence and tucked into the drawer where he kept titles and warranties. The drawer's contents, once ordinary, had now become part of an archive of a life he suspected might end. On a rainy Tuesday, Connor dropped by unexpectedly. He found Ryan sitting at the table with coffee cooling into brown sludge and an open laptop beside him. The light outside was washed into a watercolor of grays. "You still going down this road?" Connor asked, taking the proffered mug and sipping without asking. Ryan shrugged. "I have to know." Connor wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "You could walk away, you know. No one would blame you." Ryan looked at him as if the suggestion were an insult. "Walk away from what? From half my life? From everything I built with her?" Connor softened. "From the stomachache. From the way you can't sleep. From the suspicion that eats at you. If she's choosing to hide things, she's already starting to live elsewhere. You don't have to be there for the rehearsal." "I don't know if it's rehearsal or if it's a different show," Ryan admitted. "Either way, I can't be an extra." Sat with the silence that fell like a tarp. The shop's noises, the occasional distant rumble of a truck, the neighbor's dog barking, filtered in from outside and made their small world feel larger. "Whatever you do," Connor said finally, "don't lose yourself. Don't let this be the thing that becomes you." The advice was tender and true. Ryan nodded because he wanted to believe it could be done. He wanted to remain himself, the man who could fix things, the man who could plan, not the man who broke and scattered. But there was also an ember of something darker, a promise he felt in his bones that he would not let this slip without consequence. Not because of pride alone, but because the fact of deceit had 1,000 tiny tentacles that reached into the life he'd been building. He wanted them cut clean. That night, he dreamed of seeing Megan laughing with another man in a bungalow, her hair loose, her hand on a shoulder like a claim. He woke with his throat full of salt and a cold fist clenched in his gut. It was then that he decided he wouldn't merely ask for explanation. He would assemble a record. If she had to rewrite history, he would keep a copy of the original. Emphasizing. He began to document everything. He archived text messages, saved images, printed bank statements in triplicate, made notes in a small leather notebook that had once been used for ordering parts. Each item he documented felt like a brick laid in a wall that would either shelter him or trap him. There was a cruelty to it, he knew, to catalog the parts of a life that might once have been spoken of in softer tones. But he found in the process a kind of stability he had not felt in months. Ming. He did not tell her. He did not tell Connor more than he already had. He moved like a man under repair, careful with tools, precise in motion, trying to avoid shattering anything he might later need to prove worthwhile. There was, he realized, a small, perverse comfort in building a case rather than unraveling into a scene. It was less dramatic. It was cleaner. It left behind evidence with edges sharp enough to cut. Marriage. If Megan had lied, the lie had to be laid bare with more than accusation. It needed documentation, dates, corroboration. If she had not lied, his actions would be an ugly intrusion into privacy and trust. He accepted this risk because the alternatives were worse. The slow erosion of certainty, the small doubts that would metastasize. Yikes. On the third week of watching and waiting, an envelope arrived at the shop. Postage, return address, the crispness of paper that had traveled. Ryan sliced it open with a mechanic's knife like he was opening the hood of a car he intended to repair. Inside were printed pages, emails labeled with dates and times, a scanned receipt from Willow Palms, a name he recognized, the lawyer Megan had mentioned. There were explanations, redactions, parts of conversations left out. Emily. He read it twice, then a third time. The receipt matched the charge. The timestamps aligned. The lawyer's name checked out with a bar listing. It was what she'd promised. A paper trail that matched the story she'd told on the phone. Seizing. Relief rose like a false tide. For a moment, the knot unclenched. He felt it in his chest like a slackening muscle. Maybe this would be the end. Maybe he would be the husband who'd apologize silently to his wife for being a fool. Maybe he would sleep, Mex. Then, beneath the printed pages, tucked like an afterthought, was a strip of a photograph that had been torn. It depicted a pair of hands on a weathered railing, two coffee cups in the twilight. The hands were not hers and his together. They were hers with another. Someone had torn the picture mid-frame, removing faces and leaving only the evidence of intimacy. The close proximity, the overlap of knuckles, the curl of fingers. Ming. There was no explanation for the torn photo, no legal redaction, no lawyerly footnote. The torn edge felt like an accusation that had been made too carefully, as if someone wanted the proof messy enough to suggest possibilities without granting absolutes. Ryan stared at the torn paper until the edges blurred. He felt the old urge then, the wish to explode, to make a sound big enough to fracture the quiet, but he resisted. Precision, he reminded himself. Quiet. Method. He carefully returned the documents to their envelope, slid the torn photo into the leather notebook, and closed the cover with a soft, final click. Outside, rain began to tap on the shop roof in feathered, increasing rhythms. Inside, Ryan sat with the documents and the torn photograph and felt the first real, rational dread. Whether she had lied or not, something had been hidden. Whether it was betrayal or a private crisis, the shelter of their shared life had been breached. He poured whiskey and did not drink. He set the cup aside and opened the notebook to a blank page. Beneath the heading, Week 3, Evidence, he wrote in a hand steadier than his heart felt. Willow Palms, receipt matches credit card. Lawyer present, photo torn. Next steps, verify names, confirm bungalow register, check CCTV if possible. Call contact at resort. Consider PI if no cooperation. The list felt like a beginning. He folded the paper, placed it back in the drawer with his other files, and shut the shop for the night. The engine of his life hummed with motion, the slow, deliberate gearing into a task that replaced the ache. He had a path. Whether it led to reconciliation or to ruin, he no longer sat idle waiting to see which way the wind would blow. He would step into it, and whatever came would be met with the kind of resolve you get from a man who knows how to strip an engine down to its block and start again. Ryan learned to believe in small proofs. In the garage, you didn't rely on intuition. You checked tolerances, measured clearances, listened for the tiny noises that told you a bearing was failing. Outside of the shop, the world of people did not offer such tidy signals, but he would make it so. If Megan's life had become a machine of her own design, he would pry open panels and read the serial numbers. He started where he always started, with tools he trusted and friends who still answered when a call came at odd hours. Connor was the first to volunteer without being asked. He'd come by the shop with coffee cups and a nervous sort of loyalty, the kind that got his jaw tight and his fingers fidgeting when a friend was hurting. "You want me to come with?" Connor asked that morning, hovering like a question mark. "No," said, "not yet." He saw no nobility in dragging another into the mess. This was his to map and to own. "But I might need you later. Keep your Wednesdays free." Connor nodded, and Ryan could see the relief wash like oil across his brow. The thing about friends was they made silence less heavy. Connor, even when he said nothing, reminded Ryan he was not entirely alone. Those Resort was a 2-hour drive in a car Ryan rented under a name he pretended to be. A writer, a journalist chasing an easy human interest piece. He told himself the lie out of habit. Lying, he had discovered, had become an instrument as practical as a torque wrench. He listened to the road like a man listening for bearing noise, for the irregularities that signaled something out of alignment. The map was a straight, unremarkable line of highway, and then slower coastal road, the kind of landscape that encouraged thinking. Shapiro Palms looked like a postcard stitched into reality. Palms bowed over a sandy drive, lanterns hung like patient stars, bungalows spaced to suggest privacy. Everything about it was curated comfort. It was also, he realized as he parked and watched the resort staff glide like actors across their stage, the perfect place to hide significant smallnesses. Whispered affairs, stolen weekends, confessions traded like currency, misinformation. He walked to the front desk with a quietness that felt like armor. The clerk smiled with the practiced immediacy of a hospitality professional. Ryan used the name he'd prepared, a soft, plausible voice. "I'm just checking some information for a feature," he said, sliding his notebook across like it was a prop. "Bungalow registers, guest logs. Anything you can tell me about Bungalow 23's occupancy last month?" Silenced. The clerk hesitated a breath longer than discretion demanded. "We keep guest records private," she said, "but there are ways management can confirm stays if you have authorization." Authorization. The word landed heavy. Ryan found himself pivoting, thinking back to the leather notebook in the drawer at home, the small list of favors and contacts he'd been compiling like a mechanic gathering matching sockets. He had one useful contact, the cousin of a retired cop who now worked security at a medium-sized hospital. It wasn't the police, but security men understood access and shadows. He phoned the cousin from the parking lot, keeping his voice even and nonchalant. A few carefully worded sentences, and the cousin agreed to a favor. A discreet check of public-facing logs. Nothing illegal. Nothing that would require a warrant. Privilege in small towns ran on favors more than forms. They worked like a team of men who had spent too many nights repairing other people's mistakes. The cousin, James, called back 2 hours later with a short list and a restrained laugh. "They do a lot of weddings, man," he said, "but I pulled a name that could be your Megan's. Paid for 2 guests under a credit card that matches a local billing address. Bungalow 23 was occupied from Friday to Sunday. There's a maintenance log for that bungalow on Saturday evening. No one from resort security reported anything suspicious. Just a late-night noise complaint about loud conversation." Ryan thanked him and hung up, but the thank you was small, enough to fit in his mouth like a stone. The information confirmed the ledger line in his bank statement. The resort's indifference confirmed the thing he feared most, that in a place designed for secrets, nothing was accidental. He rented a room at the inn 2 bungalows down and set up a base of operations. The bungalow was small and smelled faintly of salt and lemon cleaner. He placed his bought binoculars on the bedside table, like a worker laying out calipers before a long job. He cooked little for himself, cereal, reheated coffee, and kept his hours in a way that suited surveillance. Night awake, day pretending to be someone who wanted to read in the shade. On the first night he learned how much human deception sounds like casual noise. Laughter filtered through walls, voices rose and fell, glasses clicked in minor percussion. At 2 in the morning, a door 3 doors down slammed. An argument, then a door closing with a softness that suggested someone retreating into bedroom shadow. He recorded snippets on his phone, not to listen to them like a voyeur, but to collect pieces that might later be framed as evidence. He felt a tiny shame each time he hit record, a shame that burned and hardened into purpose. Alleviate patterns. Men and women came and went in different guises. Honeymooners, conference goers, couples who'd claimed a privacy they did not need to justify. On Saturday afternoon, a couple arrived at Bungalow 23. A woman who moved with quiet precision, hair tucked into a loose knot. A man who laughed like he owned breath. She wore a coat that smelled faintly of the perfume Ryan knew in the dip of its notes. The familiarity of that scent struck him like a stubbed toe. He watched them from the veranda of his own little rented room, pretending to read newspapers while his eyes catalogued every tilt of the woman's head. Megan. He told himself the name like a prayer and a verdict at once. He watched as she leaned toward the man, as their hands met casually on a railing. He took pictures with his phone, hands steady because a camera reduces panic to pixels. Close-ups of the hands, a shot of the set of their shoulders, a wide of the bungalow at dusk with the 2 shapes clearly visible through gauzy curtain seams. Each image felt both obscene and essential. He'd always thought of photography as truth. Now he resented it for making the truth blunt. That night, as the moon rose and the resort quieted into the low hiss of night insects and air conditioning, he crept closer. He told himself he was only getting good angles, legitimate images for a case file, but the truth was more raw. He moved in the way habits of old craft had taught: soft footsteps, measured breathing, a confidence earned from fixing oil-stained problems. He found a service path behind the bungalows and used it as cover. Bungalow 23's back door was slightly ajar, the brass plate fresh, the paint around the knob scuffed from frequent use. Lingdramnia inside, shadow and the smell of perfume and coffee lingered. A towel had been draped over a chair. 2 wine glasses sat on a small table, one with lipstick on the rim. His stomach turned. He fumbled with the camera in his pocket, taking pictures of the interior. A scarf on the couch, a receipt tucked beneath a coaster with a name that matched the charge. Evidence, he told himself. Exhale measured and small. He did not enter the bedroom. That felt like theft in a way that would not be excused as pragmatism. Instead, he recorded the room from the doorway, the angle catching their tossed shoes and a magazine on a side table. In the bathroom, he found toiletries arranged in a way that suggested shared use. He pocketed a small paper matchbook with the resort logo and took the match strip as if the object were a fingerprint. It hit him then how many small things made up a life, the way a matchbook might hold 1,000 tiny transactions of human closeness. Back in his own bungalow, he reviewed the images and tried not to let them rearrange the shape of his heart. The photos were clean and irrefutable. He cataloged them, time-stamped, labeled. Each label felt like an incision he was making into something that had once been whole. He texted a single message to Connor. "I have what I need. Not ready to move yet." Simple, coded, and true enough. Obierno. He drove back to town late that night, returning to the shop before sunrise to wash the weariness of the road from his hands. He laid the camera on the bench and spread the printed images like a mechanic spreading parts on a tarp. He examined them the way he would a new alternator, for damage, for guarantees, for anomalies that might suggest fraud. In the corner of one photograph, a reflection caught his eye. A figure at the edge of the porch, half hidden, looking directly at the lens. He zoomed in and squinted until his eyes blurred. That figure could have been anyone, just a passerby. Or it could have been the man whose face he'd never seen in full. A presence that became more menacing because of what he did not know. The bedrock of Klang. The bedrock of his plan lay not in the heat of a confrontation, but in the accumulation of irrefutable detail. He had with him the receipt, the booking, the photographs, the torn image that had arrived in the envelope, and now these new images from the bungalow. He could build a story that no careful lawyer could reframe as coincidence. Immigration. And yet, even as he clicked through evidence and arranged it on legal pads, a part of him felt hollowed out. Seeing Megan laughing with another man had been worse than any imagined confrontation. It made the possibility real and cruel. In the bright fluorescence of the shop, surrounded by sockets and wrenches, he felt both profoundly alive and forever altered. He had always expected his life to be steady, a series of repairs and maintenance. Now, the mechanics of his heart had been pulled apart, and the schematic looked unfamiliar. Connor arrived mid-morning with his usual energy and a bag of bad jokes. He looked at the photographs on the bench and let out a sound that was part disbelief and part pity. "You got her," he said simply. Ryan shrugged. "I didn't get her. I got the truth." Connor's face hardened in the way men's faces do when they decide strategy. "So what now?" Ryan looked at the neat pile of evidence and counted off options with the precision of a man used to inventory. "We keep it quiet. We document everything. We don't act on impulse. If she's willing to lie, she's willing to fight to reframe this. If I want this to mean anything, I have to make sure it can't be explained away." Connor nodded. "You want me to burn the evidence into a CD? Make copies?" "No," Ryan said. "Physical copies. Paper, photos, receipts. We'll keep digital too, but I want things they can't rewrite with a click. Lay it out like a docket. Make it messy if they try to clean it." They worked like two men building a case file in a garage, lit by the cold light of determination. In the back of Ryan's mind, a simpler, baser thought pulsed. to stand at her door and make her see what she'd done. But he suppressed it with the ease of a seasoned mechanic choosing a tool fit for the job. Precision would do more than theatrics. He wanted an end with margins sealed, not a messy melodrama that would leave loose threads. The truth, once found, had the unpleasant habit of reshaping people. For Ryan, it had become both ladder and blade, a way to climb out of confusion and a reason to cut what could not be mended. He taped the last photograph into the notebook and closed it with a finality that felt like a hinge locking. Isolation. The day moved in its ordinary way. Trucks passing, a dog barking at a mailman, a neighbor mowing a lawn. The normalcy offended him. Inside the shop, the hum of fluorescent lights sounded ordinary and vast at once. Ryan leaned back and let the smell of oil ground him. Evidence was in place. Next steps needed to be calibrated. He had crossed the boundary from suspicion to knowledge, and the world beyond that boundary was smaller and harder than he had expected. He had what he needed, but having it did not make the ache any lighter. It made the work cleaner, more honest, and it made the next moves inevitable. Ryan had always believed that truth, once uncovered, would bring peace. He was wrong. Truth, he learned, was a kind of acid. It burned through denial, dissolved trust, and left behind the raw metal of what a person really was. Schizophrenia. For 3 nights he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that image again. Bungalow 23, golden light spilling from its curtains, and Megan's silhouette leaning too close to a man whose laughter didn't belong in their story. The pictures were saved, printed, and hidden inside the glove compartment of his truck, but his mind replayed them like a song stuck on repeat. He drove to work early, stayed late, pretended to fix engines that didn't need fixing. His hands worked out of habit, but his head was miles away, stuck in that bungalow, in that betrayal. Even Connor's attempts at conversation failed. The shop's usual rhythm, metal clanks, oil smells, and country radio, felt foreign now, like he was living inside someone else's life. That Thursday night, Ryan sat at the kitchen table with a half-empty bottle of whiskey and his notebook of evidence. He'd written every lie she'd told, every date, every location, every little thing that no longer made sense. At the top of the page, in his rough handwriting, he wrote 3 words: "End this right." Unrest. He wasn't the kind of man who lashed out. He didn't believe in shouting matches or throwing things. If Megan wanted chaos, she wouldn't get it from him. He'd take everything she'd built, quietly, efficiently, completely. The next morning, Ryan went to see James, the cousin of Connor's old friend, the security man who had helped confirm the booking. They met in a diner off the highway, where the smell of fried eggs and burnt coffee made everything seem normal, almost friendly. "You said she booked under her own name?" Ryan asked, stirring sugar into his coffee, though he never drank it sweet. James nodded. "Yeah, card matched the address on your file. No aliases, no fake IDs, which means she wasn't hiding from the resort." Ryan's jaw tightened. She wasn't hiding from them. She was hiding from me. James leaned in. "You sure you want to go further with this? Some people, when they find out the truth, it eats them alive." Stare didn't waver. "I'm already eaten." Back home, Ryan began preparing like a soldier planning a mission. He went through their joint bank accounts, marking every transaction that didn't make sense. He noticed transfers, small at first, then larger, to an account he didn't recognize. Megan's name wasn't on it, but the routing matched her father's old bank in Florida. He called the bank posing as her assistant again, calm and polite. "Just verifying some recent activity for Mrs. Ryan's office expenses," he said. The rep hesitated but confirmed the account existed and was registered under Willow Legal Consulting. Ryan almost laughed. Willow, the same as the resort. She wasn't just lying, she was building something, a life outside of him, maybe even with that man. Contingency. For the first time, anger sharpened his calm into something deadly precise. That night, Ryan sat outside their house in his truck, staring at the glow of the living room lights. Megan still hadn't come home. She'd texted earlier saying, Working late again. Big case tomorrow. Don't wait up. He typed a reply, then erased it. Instead, he opened a new note in his phone and began to write. Not to her, but for himself. She doesn't deserve my voice, only my silence and my strategy. He spent the next 2 hours drafting what would become the blueprint of her downfall. GMMGM, financial closure, transfer all joint savings into his business account, legally his, as he was the sole registered owner. Property protection, file paperwork changing house ownership to his name. She'd signed a quitclaim last year for refinancing. She'd just never realized what it meant. Evidence archive, store physical proof in multiple locations, one at the shop, one at Connor's house, one mailed to himself unopened, time-stamped for legal verification. Pennsylvania, detachment, change all passwords, cancel her credit extensions, block her from business accounts. Chime, eyes is, return a set. Deliver truth, not confrontation. Send everything, to her firm, to her family, to the man in the photos, at once. He read the plan over and over until every step felt like a heartbeat. Calm, exact, unstoppable. The next day, Ryan put on his old mechanic's jacket and drove back to Willow Palms Resort. The front desk manager looked up, surprised to see him again. "Mr. Matthews, right?" she said, using the fake name he'd used before. "Yes," Ryan replied smoothly. "I was hoping to speak with your manager. There was a billing issue with Bungalow 23 during my research stay." The woman frowned slightly but obliged. A few minutes later, the resort manager, a tall man with sunburned skin and a polite, empty smile, joined them. Ryan handed over an envelope. Inside were printed copies of the receipts and a photo of Megan with her lover, both smiling on the bungalow porch. "I just wanted to make sure your resort doesn't accidentally charge my wife again," Ryan said quietly. Disbelief, scanning the photo. "Your wife?" Shimmer. Ryan said, his voice like ice. "And I'd appreciate your discretion. You see, she's an attorney, very public reputation." The manager swallowed hard. "Of course, completely confidential. Corrosion." Ryan leaned closer, his tone barely above a whisper. "Because if any of this leaks, I'll assume it came from here, and I'll destroy this place the way she destroyed my home." He turned and left before the man could respond, the sound of his boots sharp against the polished tile floor. On the drive home, rain began to fall, steady, rhythmic, relentless. It felt fitting. He rolled down the window and let the cold droplets sting his face. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel powerless. He felt clean. He pulled into the driveway and saw the porch light on. Megan's car was there. Her silhouette moved inside, graceful and unaware, like the person she used to be before secrets grew between them. Ryan sat in his truck for a long time, watching the light flicker across the curtains. He wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Not until every piece was in place. When he finally walked inside, Megan was sitting on the couch, smiling faintly. "Hey," she said, her tone light, rehearsed. "You're home early." Ryan smiled back, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "Just thought I'd come home, to where it all began." She nodded, looking slightly puzzled, but said nothing. He watched her walk toward the kitchen, her perfume trailing behind her like a memory of the woman he'd loved. It no longer smelled like comfort. It smelled like evidence. Ryan poured himself a drink and sat down at the same spot on the couch where it had all started. The pictures, the lies, the resort, it all led here, to this moment of calm before the storm. He whispered under his breath, almost like a promise to the empty room. "Next time you leave, Megan, you won't have anything left to come back to." And with that, Ryan's revenge stopped being a plan. It became momentum. Ryan did not tell anyone the whole plan. Secrets needed shelter. Strategy needed airtight compartments. He told Connor only the parts that required another pair of hands. Duplicating documents, driving a car to a new address, keeping watch on a Sunday when the resort staff was thinner. Even then, Connor asked no questions beyond the practical. He brought coffee, a steady presence, and the occasional bad joke that helped Ryan remember he still had a friend in the world. The setup began with small, surgical moves. He changed passwords quietly. Bank, utilities, the little online accounts that still used a shared email. He canceled the automatic credit cards tied to their household accounts and rerouted statements to his business address. Each click was dull and bureaucratic, but together they tightened a net. He wasn't trying to punish her with spectacle. He was trying to make sure that if she walked, she would do it into a world she no longer owned. Next came the practicalities that felt bitterly domestic. He spoke to a lawyer under the pretense of needing advice about household financial reorganization. The attorney, a woman with clinical patience, indicated the papers she'd signed during a refinancing could be used to transfer title with a simple affidavit. Paperwork Megan would never suspect because she'd trusted him to handle the mundane. Ryan listened and filed her instructions away, like a wrench he'd keep on hand. But the heart of the plan belonged at Willow Palms. He booked Bungalow 22 for a weekend 2 weeks out, using a rental company's name and a burner credit card he'd topped up at the shop. He wanted proximity, the ability to watch without being obvious, and a plausible pretext. A quiet weekend to clear his head, he told the clerk when he called. The reservation was confirmed in soft, neutral language. Connor drove him down the coastal highway and dropped him off 2 bungalows away. "Be careful," Connor said, voice rough with something like mercy. "Don't let this make you less than you are." "I won't," Ryan lied by omission. He had no intention of becoming less, only sharper. He arrived with a small kit, a camera, extra batteries, a cheap voice recorder, printed copies of the receipts, the torn photo from the envelope, and a folder of printed statements. He placed these in the safe space of his rented bungalow, arranging them with the same care he used when laying out tools before a repair. There was a cold satisfaction in the order. Evidence visible, obvious, provable. For 2 days he tested the boundaries. He learned the staff's routines, when the night clerk left, which maintenance worker took the back route, how the light in Bungalow 23's hallway flickered at 3 in the morning. He watched the comings and goings, breakfast on the veranda, evening swims, cigarette breaks. He took notes like a mechanic diagnosing a subtle misalignment, times, descriptions, voices. He was careful not to get drawn into cruelty. He wanted the evidence to do the talking. Softened. On the second night, he slipped a card into the front desk manager's office. A simple note asking for discretion. A mention that what she might see was sensitive, and an offer, not a threat, that if discretion wasn't kept, there would be consequences. He didn't have to boast. Implication was more persuasive and cleaner. The manager's response later, a terse voicemail promising nothing would leak from the resort, felt like a small, purchased piece. Transmission's interactions with Megan were surgical too. He texted casually, the kind of short messages couples send when their lives are busy. A meme, a question about a light bulb, nothing that hinted at the hurricane he was building. She replied with the practiced affection of someone keeping a balance. "Hang in there. Call me when you can." Her responses felt like small loans to a life she was withdrawing from. Semantics. He recorded conversations discreetly when they were in the same room. Not because he wanted to humiliate her in public, but because he wanted a record that left no room for later reinterpretation. He also made copies of everything he could get his hands on. Receipts, email headers, the login history of their shared streaming account. It was tedious work, but satisfactory in a way he hadn't expected. Each photocopy was a tiny act of reclamation. Of the setup was the envelope. He assembled it like he'd assembled engines. Components arranged, checks run, timing calibrated. Inside went the printed receipts from Willow Palms, the bungalow photos, the torn photograph, a few select texts and emails, and a short letter. Not angry, Not pleading, just precise. It read, in part, "You engineered a life that left me out of its design. I am reclaiming what I can. Honesty, possessions, dignity. This is not a plea, it is documentation." He prepared 3 copies. One would be mailed to Megan's law firm, one to her father's listed address in Florida, and one he would leave at the front desk of Willow Palms with a simple instruction: keep this on file. He wanted the exposure to feel inevitable and orderly, not explosive. The idea was to remove ambiguity, and to do it in a way that left the world to process the evidence without the melodrama he'd avoided so far. On the evening of delivery, Ryan walked to the resort office with the envelope tucked inside his jacket. He felt the weight of it against his ribs like a small, dense heart. The manager greeted him with an air of rehearsed hospitality, and when he asked, took the envelope with a solemn nod. "We'll file this confidentially," the man said. "Please do," Ryan replied. "And if anything comes of it, I want this time-stamped and retained." The manor promised. Ryan left feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction. There was an odd emptiness, like standing in a kitchen after a meal and realizing you'd been the only one eating. He drove back to his bungalow and sat on the small porch, listening to the ocean breathing against the shore. The plan was in motion. The pieces were nearly all in place. He called Connor and spoke in terse terms. "Everything's ready. Be available Friday." Connor's laugh was a short, sharp sound. "You sure about this, man?" "As I'll ever be," Ryan said. Travis, he lay awake and thought of small, mundane things he'd miss even if she left. The way she arranged spices in the cupboard, the chipped mug with the initials he'd given her as a joke. The grief of those small losses was a quiet counterpoint to the lust for retribution. He felt both at once, precise, aching, complicated. The past inattention not past inattention, not unlike the one before a major repair. Notes taken, adjustments made, waiting for the right moment to tighten the last bolt. He felt like a man on the edge of a long job finally ready to begin. The setup had been executed with the care of someone who'd spent his life making broken things work again. What remained was the execution of consequences, not vindictive flourishes, but an economy of truth that he intended to deliver with the same exactness he used to set a torque wrench. The drive back to Willow Palms was quiet, the highway a ribbon of dark, the dashboard lights small and honest. Rain had rinsed, the heat from the air, the night smelled clean and slightly metallic, like the inside of a garage after a storm. Ryan kept his hands steady on the wheel. He felt a careful detachment settle over him, the same clarity that had guided him through taking apart engines and putting them together again. Tonight, the work was different. Smaller gestures, deliberate timings, a discipline that felt like both mercy and punishment. He arrived before midnight. The resort looked subdued under the moon, the palm fronds black on the horizon, lanterns dotted like low stars. People who came to places like this expected privacy. They expected their moments to hold. Ryan had come to make those moments speak. He parked a block away and walked the rest, cloak of an ordinary man about him. It was easier than he'd thought to become a shadow. Lights winked in Bungalow 23. Through the gauze of curtains he could see 2 figures, close, confident, casual in a way his own life no longer permitted. Megan's laugh floated out, thin and intimate. It hit him like a physical thing and he swallowed it down, smoothing his expression. He lifted the small camera from his jacket and, hands steady with habit, took pictures. Each click sounded ridiculous in the hush of the night. Each image felt like a ledger being written. That approached the door. That kind of confrontation was noise, and noise could be excused as passion or weakness. He preferred the clean lines of evidence. He moved along the paths, finding vantage points where a reflection in a window would give him a better image, where a backlight would silhouette their conversation into stark shapes. He recorded phrases that reached him through the open air, a joke, a soft complaint, the mention of a future trip. With each snippet, he felt his theory harden into fact. At 2 a.m, when the party dwindled to a hush and the shadows thickened, Ryan slipped to the maintenance area. He found a service door that led to a narrow corridor behind the bungalows. The corridor smelled of damp paint and old cleaning supplies. From there, he could see the back patio of Bungalow 23 through a slatted fence. Megan and the man had stepped outside, cigarettes in their hands, faces close enough that the moon carved their profiles in silver. The intimacy of it made his chest ache, but he kept his face set like a man fitting a new part into a stubborn engine. He recorded everything he could without being seen. The scent of her perfume in the air, the soft cadence of her voice as she said things he knew should have been for him, the man's laugh, the way he touched her arm, the quick privacy with which they traded names and small confidences. Ryan's recorder held it all in quiet, impartial fidelity. He felt ridiculous and deadly pragmatic at once. When they moved back inside, he found the back door ajar. It might have been a careless breeze or a tired guest. He paused on the threshold, feeling the old impulse to rush, to shout, to thrust the truth into the room like a hand grabbing an engine part. But he did not. He took a single, careful step across the threshold and photographed the living area from an angle that included both the tossed shoes and the wine glasses with the lipstick rim. His hands did not tremble. He took a matchbook from the coffee table and pocketed it. It was the smallest of trophies, and yet it felt concrete in a life that had become suddenly abstract. He did not touch the bedroom door. He did not rifle drawers. He respected a margin of decency, even as he dismantled a life. That restraint mattered to him. It kept his actions from becoming what he hated most, cruel for cruelty's sake. He left the bungalow exactly as he had found it, closing the back door softly so no one would realize it had been opened. The photographs and recordings were the work. The rest was theater he had no interest in producing. At the resort desk, he left nothing that would directly implicate the staff. Instead, he tucked a second envelope into the manager's hands the next morning. The compiled evidence, politely labeled, with a short note asking them to retain it in case questions arose. He watched the manager read. The polite mask slipped a degree, then was regained. "We will keep this confidential," the man said. His voice suggested a man caught between hospitality and the practicalities of reputation. Ryan nodded. "Please do. And if anything ever appears online, know it didn't come from me." He could have blurted 1,000 things. He could have filled the lobby with pictures and demanded to see Megan's name removed from every record. He could have made a spectacle and let the world watch her fall. Instead, he chose a quieter cruelty, the certainty that truth, when presented with documentation and timing, becomes inexorable. People don't need to be shouted at when the papers are stacked neatly and the photos are dated. Backhurled looked the home, the world looked the same but felt thinner. Megan arrived in the afternoon with sun in her hair and a story about airport delays. She moved through the house with the casual rite of someone who believed she'd taken only a weekend. She dropped her bag and flopped onto the couch, scrolling idly on her phone. Ryan made coffee and set a cup across from her. He sat down. The couch seemed too small. He watched her, noting the slight fatigue in her eyes, the way she pushed a strand of hair behind one ear when she answered texts. He set the envelope on the coffee table, face down. He did not watch her notice it. He waited. Later, she excused herself to take a call in the bedroom. From the doorway, he could hear her voice, steady at first, then faltering. He saw her emerge with an expression that was not quite alarm and not quite recognition. She crossed the room slowly, and when she reached the coffee table, she stopped. Her hand hovered over the envelope for a second as if sensing its gravity, then picked it up. Control that passed through her face when she unfolded the pages was not one of surprise, but of slow comprehension. Like a mechanic realizing the extent of gear damage only after hearing the engine fail. Her breath came shallow. She sank down opposite him and met his eyes across a 30-year life he'd arranged into evidence. He didn't yell. He simply said quietly, "I thought you deserved to know how it looks." She stared at him, then at the photographs, then at the receipt, the torn photo, the matchbook. For a moment she was silent, and in that silence Ryan sensed something unspooling inside her. A rawness he would not go to town to watch. It was private and terrible. He had sought truth, not spectacle. He had wanted a clean ledger. The ledger lay open on the table, ink dark and immutable. Shattered explanations, blurred, stumbling. There were half-truths and justifications, and the kind of legal phrases lawyers can make sing. He listened and catalogued and felt, underneath the numbness, the precise satisfaction of a plan being executed as intended. When she finally spoke in a voice low and ragged, it was not the pleading he'd imagined. "Why did you go to the resort?" she asked. It was a small question that revealed everything. Her own surprise at having been seen, and his decision to look. "Because I needed proof," he said simply. "Not for me, for both of us. So we couldn't lie anymore." Shield, she folded her hands in her lap, and in that motion seemed smaller, as if the material of their life had been taken from her. Ryan felt a complex mixture of pity and rage. He had wanted honesty. He had wanted the dignity of truth. Now he had it, the blunt, ugly version that left no room for slow reconciliations. The night that followed held no theatrics. There was no dramatic confrontation, no banging plates, no words thrown like fistfuls of metal. Instead, there was a long, exacting conversation, legal questions, talk of futures and contracts, of who would keep what and who would owe what. He had bile and resolution in equal measure. She had regret and a practical, stunned acceptance. The sound that filled the house was adult and weary, like the slow turning of a lathe cutting down a piece to its intended shape. By the time dawn stitched itself through the curtains, both of them were exhausted in a new way. The house held them both, two people who had once been a single unit, now functioning like separate engines whose parts might not mesh again. Ryan had not intended to break everything for the satisfaction of breaking. He'd intended to close one chapter with the cleanliness of a well-executed repair. The aftermath was messier. He had the proof he'd sought. He also had to live with what it meant. Outside, the world began again. The mail arrived. The neighbor watered his lawn. A school bus hissed down the road. Inside, two people sat with a stack of photographed nights between them. The truth had spoken. It had not offered comfort. It had offered only the shape of what came next. Morning arrived like an impartial judge. Paperwork moved faster than feelings. Ryan signed forms with the same steadiness he used to torque bolts. Precise, necessary, final. Property changed hands on paper. Accounts were separated. He mailed copies of the evidence to the addresses that mattered. Her firm, her father's mailbox, the resort, and let bureaucracy carry the truth. Megan packed without drama, a suitcase, a few photos, the ritual of things reduced to essentials. She left the key on the counter. They held each other's eyes for a long beat, two strangers who once fit together. No speeches, no pleading. Everything had been decided. Immigration. Ryan watched her drive away and felt a clean, aching emptiness, like removing a damaged part. He kept the house and the shop and the ledger of proofs. Outside, life resumed. Inside, he learned to rebuild, bolt by bolt, around the hollow she left. Revenge had been precise. Living afterward would be a different kind of work.